This morning on Media and Society, more than 120 suspects, many of them illegal immigrants, were arrested following the gang rape of 8 women at an abandoned mine last week in Krugersdorp. We unpack media coverage of the Krugersdorp gang rape. And campaigns have closed in Kenya ahead of general elections. Kenyans go to the polls on Tuesday to elect a president. This morning, we look at the role of social media in political campaigns. Oh, hello and welcome to Media and Society on SABC News, independent and impartial. My name is Naledi Molewa. Now, this is where we look at the intersection between media and audiences. And of course, as always, this show is really not complete without your say. So connect with us via our social media channels or share your views and concerns about how the media works and what we feed you. On Twitter, use the hashtag SABC Media Society, or write this number down because this is how you give us a call: 011-714-6841 or 011-714-6842. Well, this is the big discussion that we're having this morning on Media and Society. So recently, William Bird and Tandy Smith from Media Monitoring Africa wrote an article that says that the media needs to do better in how it reports on gender-based violence. They further write that in the recent gruesome gang rape of women in Gauteng's West Rand, they feel that the reporting has focused too much on the possible nationality of the perpetrators, which they say detracts from the rape, as the focus on nationality really seeks to offer a scapegoat to what is an offense that is incomprehensible in its brutality. The article is on News 24. Go take a look at it. But over the years, we've seen names of many women who have been raped, publicized all over the media, and even murdered. We probably remember their names, but we seldom remember the names of those who committed those crimes. Well, let's get into that discussion. And why is it that that happens, that we remember the victim and not the perpetrator? Surely it should be the other way around. But joining us to talk about how the media reports on rape, on gender-based violence, we're joined by Kubi Rama, who is the Executive Director at Gender Links. We're also joined by Annie Dorasamy, who's the editor of the Sunday Tribune, and Untitled Chapter, who is the Community Education and Mobilization Unit Manager at Sonke Gender Justice. But remember, give us a call as well, 011-714-6841. Ladies, a good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. And this is really a difficult discussion. But I wonder, Kubi, if you feel that we are starting to make progress in how we have the discussion around rape in the media. I know that Gender Links has talked quite a bit about how the media handles gender-based violence.
Well, I think the real question is, how do you measure progress? And if one looks at the studies we've conducted, the gender and media progress studies, the proportion of women's sources in the South African media remains steady at around 26-27%. So I don't think we're actually improving the way we cover gender stories, particularly stories like rape. And when you said that we remember the names of the people who have been raped, but not those who have raped, I think that's not entirely true. We remember the names of those people who are raped who make it into the news media. Like those, I cannot even imagine what those 8 young women are going through right now in terms of their experience. But that discourse now has evolved into foreigners raping 8 women in South Africa. That's really not even relevant. What about all those rapes we don't even get to hear about? More than 10,000 rapes between January and March of this year. And I think the discussion that is lacking severely is one of accountability. Why is it now such a big crisis? Because of the incident that occurred when law enforcement was aware that there was illegal mining, that it was happening, nothing was done. We have lost the prevention agenda in South Africa. And we need to hold government and all of us accountable for why that is the case and what we can do to reinstate that in a very, very urgent and comprehensive manner.
Yeah, I'm going to bring you in here, Sis Nonhlanhla. She, of course, is with Sonke Gender Justice. When you look at the story in Krugersdorp, the 8 women who were so brutally raped, and you look at how the media has handled that story, what is your view? Have we done it correctly?
Yeah, it's concerning, and for us, it's a case of secondary victimization of the survivors and their families. For the fact that the media has to really rally around those families just for stories, and not even thinking of the trauma that they are going through. And those families, held by the media, it's a concern. And it's not about these stories only. Like Kubi said, we work with survivors. We know when media calls us on a day-to-day basis, wanting stories of the survivors. And there is no element of care and support for the survivors. And there is no element of psychosocial support for the survivors and the families. And if you think of a mother who lost the child in a brutal way, and the stories all over the media, and now he's been haunted by calls from the media to say, we want to hear your side of the story. And at the end of the day, when you talk to the mother, there is no psychosocial support that is given to the mother in context of where the mother would go and, have that kind of a support. So in a nutshell, there is a lot to be done regarding how the media deal with the stories. And for the fact that, most of the stories that are reported, for me, they bring back the era of HIV, where a certain group of women, in terms of their age and race, they are reported about.
Right.
And that says to the community of South Africa, rape is equals to blackness. And those women that are reported about are the most vulnerable women in our society.
Yeah, that's an interesting view. Annie, I'm going to bring you in here. There are limitations as to just how much media really can do when we report on gender-based violence. I mean, there's limitations around at what point we can actually publish the name of the perpetrator. Just unpack that for the viewers so that we understand why, in some cases, we say an unnamed man is accused of raping and then name the victim. Why does that happen?
Thanks, Naledi. I think, we often have to tread very cautiously when it comes to rape and sexual assault and violence. I mean, that's very sensitive. It goes without saying. It's part of our code of ethics. Why we choose not to name the perpetrator until a certain point is that it has to be proven in a court of law that the person is guilty. And we cannot run the risk of doing so by naming him without waiting for that process to happen. When it comes to naming victims, however, there too we tread very cautiously, and it is only on the insistence of the victims themselves about wanting to be named will we do so. And even then you let them know the consequences of doing so and so. We've had an interesting story, or we've covered an interesting story just this week about a woman who chose to speak out about her rape ordeal. She's a survivor and she wants to encourage other women, but that's purely by choice, not by compulsion. So I think that's where we that's how the media covers it and has been cautious about it.
Yeah, and this is where I think the real challenge comes in, because we have a crisis in the country where we're struggling to get the right amount of prosecutions of sexual violence in the country. And then the media's got this limitation of we can't publish the name of a perpetrator until a certain point. And I'm sure, Kubi, you want to come in here, when with any other crime in the country, we name the accused at times even before they've been charged with any other crime.
No, that's absolutely true. But I think it's also about balancing the need to know who did it and who it was done to against the heinous nature of the crime and what needs to be done about it. So, Untitled is saying in the zeal to cover the story, how much more damage are we doing? And, headlines, guys. I mean, I just read a headline and, the story is amazing, but the headline says sexual abuse of women and children built into the DNA of this country. What are we saying? Are we then saying that, when we put a headline like that out, we make it almost impossible to address? Because if it's in the DNA, how do you change that? So we need to be very careful about the words that we use. So, our much beleaguered chief of police saying that it's a hobby. Rape is a hobby. I'm trying to be very calm about this because this case has infuriated me. I'm sure Nantlata feels similar. Language has power. Words have power. And I know the rules about when you publish, you can only do so after pleadings, etc. But what's the purpose of naming? I think what is much more valuable is when a woman or whoever has been raped and wants to speak out and is ready to do so and uses that experience to actually lobby and advocate for change. My fundamental issue is we are so focused on after the crime has occurred. What are we doing to stop it from happening in the first place?
And perhaps when a little later, we should talk about what those examples actually look like, Annie, and maybe that's something for you, the role that we can play in the prevention of sexual violence. Sis Nonhlanhla, I saw you nodding while Kubi was speaking there. And, as soon as the story of these 8 women in Krugersdorp hit the media, we then saw Police Minister Bheki speaking to the media. And he was saying one victim in the Krugersdorp gang rape was lucky enough to only be raped by one man. And that, that got social media talking. So how do you feel about even how authorities speak to the media on rape?
Yeah, it is concerning, and it shows how they are so disconnected to the reality of the situation of women in South Africa. It shows how much they don't really care about women in South Africa and about the safety of women in South Africa, about the dignity of women in South Africa. And for the Minister of Police to utter such a statement that I'm unable to even repeat myself at most, it is hurtful, because you are talking about a human being that has experienced an ordeal in her life, and at the end of the day, you just take it as a minor thing. And those who could really share their stories on how they live after they've experienced a rape. And what does it take for them on a day-to-day basis to wake up and be who they want to be, and the understanding power and the rights that they have that has been taken away from them. And over and above beyond that, the Minister of Police, who is failing this country, and more especially women in this country, utters such a statement. And in this day and era, where we are as a country working towards making sure that we respond and we prevent gender-based violence, him knowing very well that we as a civil society organization, we really, dedicated our lives, our time and everything to ensure that country has a national strategic plan. But by this kind of a statement, it really shows that there's a lot that needs to be done, even from the president himself. I just want to really bring him in this conversation as well, because we know that we are in a space where there's a preparation for a summit, and one wonders if senior officials in government uttering such statement, what does that summit mean to us as women in this country?
Right.
So it's a concern. And the thing, maybe coming back to the issue of reporting, I think it's very important to understand that in terms of reporting the stories of sexual violence and rape, we need to be victim-centered. Everything needs to be led by the survivors. We need to listen. We need to respect the dignity and, the power that the women in South Africa have been.
Yeah, I'm losing you for a little bit there, and I know your line isn't great, and that's why she keeps freezing. But we're going to continue this conversation. And perhaps when we come back, we'll start talking about what the right approach is then. What's the right language that the media should be using when reporting on rape in South Africa? And you can give us a call, 011-714-6841 to be part of the conversation. Welcome back. You're still watching Media and Society. I'm Naledi Molo, and we continue our conversation around how the media covers stories around gender-based violence. And you can be part of the conversation as well. Give us a call on 011-714-6841 or 011-714-6842. On Twitter, use the hashtag SABC Media Society. We are still in conversation with Kubi Rama, the Executive Director at Gender Links, also joined by Annie Dorasamy, who is News Editor at the Sunday Tribune, and Untitled Chapter, who is the Community and Education and Mobilization Unit Manager at Sonke Gender Justice. Annie, I'm going to come to you and say, do we still need to do a lot of training of our reporters around how to handle rape stories? Listen, I know we have a skills shortage generally in the media, but when we're talking about a sensitive issue like sexual violence, there has to surely be a particular, a very focused approach in how we train media practitioners.
Thanks, Naledi. I think that's a fantastic question. And yes, absolutely. I think that skills set is certainly lacking in the newsroom as we get, younger journalists coming into the newsroom and then being assigned to such stories. It's very important that they're properly trained before they go onto the field. Without that training, you're going to have a lot of issues when they come back. And not for their own fault, but for the lack of allowing them proper training and helping them understand the story, guiding them through it. So yes, definitely, training is needed when it comes to covering these kind of stories. Yeah,
is the issue also, Kubi, that there simply really isn't a lot of places for us to go to hold media accountable when we are irresponsible in how we report about sexual violence? That there really is this sort of free reign about how we write stories around rape, and there's nowhere to go to hold media houses accountable?
I think there are places to go, but those places don't necessarily, like the council, etc., take gender-based violence and sexual violence very seriously. And don't really, I remember every time we have the discussion with the media about accountability around the way they cover gender-based violence, sexual violence, it becomes an issue of you're trying to curb freedom of expression. We have the right to put news out there because it's part of freedom of expression. And my point is, the minute you're infringing on someone else's rights or someone else's, you're damaging more than you're building, then I'm afraid that the right to freedom of expression is no longer an inalienable right. In terms of training, I think I was a journalism lecturer for several years, for 7 years in Durban. And I always said to the students I trained, we're not here to teach you. Ultimately, we're really not here to teach you how to write or how to present. We're here to teach you how to think. Because it's really about an attitude changing a value system. Because these ridiculous headlines that you see, and then when you read the story, it keeps flashing in front of me. The one headline was, eight models raped, 1.5 million rand worth of camera equipment, film equipment stolen. How in any world is it okay to equate those two things in a headline? I'm sure you've all seen it. Who cares? Yeah, sure, 1.5 million, which is probably insured and is recoverable. How do 8 young women move on with their lives, move forward with their lives after what they've just been through? How do we then justify that kind of headline? So it's accountability even within the media. And I think there was a time, pre-COVID and even a little bit before then, where we need to have regular briefings, people like Nonhlanhla, the Sonke, Genderlinks, where every 3 months, we sit with the media and say, look, this is, in terms of how the reporting we've seen, these are some of the gaps. And I think the added dimension to this, which is now becoming extremely important, is citizen journalism, social media, because if you talk about the laws and how important those laws are to observe, because some of them are there to protect the survivor. Cases are tried in social media. By the time they get to the court, they're completely compromised. Because, there's nothing left to talk about. And obviously, there are moments where a person, the alleged accused, can say, how do I get a fair trial here? So these are, there's also a whole element of public awareness raising around social media. We were hacked on the 4th of August. We were hacked. We're having a discussion about African feminism. And somebody got into the conversation and started saying some unacceptable things and was kicked out. But they managed to get in. This is what we're doing. So that's a whole other area that we need to look at.
I remember after the rape and murder of Uyinene Mrwetyana, the country was, we all stood up and took to the streets after the murder of Uyinene. And I remember around that period, there was a conversation shift that was trying to take place where there was discussions around whether or not media should be saying a young woman is raped or talk about it in an active sort of language by saying a man has raped a woman and put the perpetrator at the center of the discussion. Sis Nonhlanhla, does that matter?
Yes, it does. It does matter because now we're also looking at the issue of victim blaming, and that language can lead to that. Because people will start asking, what was that woman doing? What was she wearing? Where was she? What time was that rape happened? So it all comes back to that space to say the focus is now on the young women, and the women will be blamed for being raped, whereas the person who perpetrated this violence is the man who did that. But also, coming back to the issue of really looking at the secondary victimization of survivors. It is very concerning if you find a lot of things that are said around how the rape is also reported, how the language is used in a manner that is really compromising the dignity of the survivor. And as I've said before, that survivors are human beings, it's important. But also you look at some of the ads on our media space when they try to get in this to the space of gender-based violence prevention. They will talk about, let us protect our women, real men don't rape. And you wonder who is really advising these people who are developing this content. Where are you? Where are you living? Why aren't you consulting with women, in terms of that language? And every time when this advert comes up, I get so tired. And I feel like I wish I could switch off this. And you open the radio, same applies. The language is so wrong. So it is very important that you have at least a space where you've got the civil society that is willing to engage with the media, consult with the civil society, and more especially women in the space.
Yeah.
And it is very concerning because GIZ has had a program where they wanted to engage with the media and let media be involved and be supported.
Right.
But they refused to sign a document that was going to really commit them to this cause. So there is no commitment, in a nutshell, from the media space to make sure that issues of gender-based violence are being handled in a correct way and women in South Africa are respected.
Yeah. You talk about those campaigns and we see them a lot. Real men don't rape. The reality is, where we see men raping, they're real. They're not imaginary phantom men. What kind of wording are we using here? Let's take a call, though. We've got Anonymous on the line from Zanin. Anonymous, good morning to you.
Morning to you and the panel members there. My contribution is that blaming the media in terms of how they report these stories might not necessarily assist us, in my view, because the media, it's a mirror of the society. What we need to do is to come with social behavioral programs that should be targeted, crime awareness campaigns that should be sent to different community areas, particularly hotspots, because the media is basically relating to what is happening in the society. And secondly, my advice to the team of Minister Bekitele, they must always insist that they write in his speech and he speaks from there, not to speak from his heart. Thank you very much.
Anonymous, thank you so much for speaking to us. Annie, I'm gonna leave it. I want to wrap it up with you and just get your final thoughts, right? You've heard a lot there from Sis Nonhlanhla, from Kubi. I imagine that hopefully this has given you a lot to think about. If media practitioners are watching as well. What do you take from the discussion? And what is the role that you then play in the language that you use moving forward on how you report about rape and gender-based violence?
Sure, thanks, Naledi. I think, in our newsroom, we've been cautious. I'd like to think so. Try to take as many measures and have as many safety nets as possible in terms of how we as a media house reports. I think my colleagues in the rest of the industry will probably do the same. Language is indeed very important, but like your caller just said now, the media is a mirror of society, and so we report and reflect what's going on out there. I think in terms of the rape of these 8 women in Krugersdorp, the media has done a really good job in terms of highlighting what has happened. And of course, the underlying problems there that has now come to the fore, which is the lack of policing and so on. Yes, we certainly can do better. Yes, training is continual. Like I said, it's really individual media houses and how they handle this very sensitive topic.
Yeah. Well, let's leave it there. Thank you so much to my guests, and I really do appreciate your time, but we can keep the conversation going on social media as well. But thanks to Kubi Rama, Executive Director at Gender Links, thanks to Annie Dorasamy, Editor of the Sunday Tribune, and Sis Nonhlanhla Skhosana of Sonke Gender Justice. Continue the conversation on Twitter, hashtag SABC Media Society. Let's take a short break. We move on to our next discussion after this. Well, it's been 15 years since Kenya's horrible and deadly post-election violence. It happened back in 2007. Now, Kenya obviously is East Africa's biggest economy, but it faces conflict quite often around elections. This year, social media is also being watched closely. Sarah Kamani is in Nairobi in Kenya, and she's compiled this report.
From his mobile phone, digital media strategist Dennis Itumbi monitors a political rally presided over by Deputy President William Ruto hundreds of kilometers away in Kisii County. He then takes instructions to social media teams on the ground.
You have anything you want to say?
No. Once we are on the campaign trail,
Yes.
still hunting for votes.
Any challenges?
On another side of the city, another social media strategist is tapping on his phone, crafting campaign messages on behalf of his 3 clients, all of them candidates in this year's election. In Kenya, political campaigns have evolved from rallies to the digital space, and any candidate will ignore social media at his own peril.
That's the battleground, yes. It's everything now.
Absolutely at the fulcrum, at the heart. For the Deputy President's campaign in Kenya this time specifically, everything.
Social media has opened up space for politicians to engage directly with potential voters, and unlike traditional and legacy media, it is cheaper.
In the past, you had to speak to the media in a press conference for media to interpret and tell the people what you're saying. Now we are avoiding that party called the media and speaking directly to that person without an interpretation and within our time.
Data from the Communications Authority of Kenya indicates that by September last year, out of the 64 million mobile phone subscriptions, 59 million of them had access to the internet. This, the greatest attraction for politicians.
This time around, social media is the main thing. Like, you need it to win some political seats, not just groundwork, because groundwork is not enough. Everyone has smartphones. They need to see you at night when they are having their dinner. They need to discuss about you.
We think this campaign will be decided on video. In the 2013 campaign, social media was relatively new. So at that point, text was everything. The update on Facebook, the tweet was everything. In 2017, Instagram had just gotten in and it was getting some traction, but still it was not the main thing. This election, WhatsApp, Instagram, has made Facebook and Twitter to be about short clips and video.
And herein lies the problem. According to research conducted by the Mozilla Foundation, online spaces have been used to spread political hate, propaganda and misinformation in Kenya.
Our politics has always been poisonous and full of very incendiary rhetoric, right? So one of the things that we have seen is that where our politics has gone, a certain kind of rhetoric has also followed. And that involves now the hate speech and incitement that we have found to have been proliferating on the platforms, along with other types of political speech, character assassination, exaggeration, attempts at deceiving, outright lies, which politicians are also very used to doing. All of that stuff has followed, followed suit onto what we call now platformized political speech.
In its latest research, the foundation found out that TikTok had become a tool for spreading political disinformation with little scrutiny.
TikTok would like people to think that it's a lip-syncing and dancing application, where people go there to have fun and all that kind of stuff. I would argue that things have changed. The application is not what it used to be. And a lot of the same ills and problems that we have seen with other platforms are inevitably going to creep up on the platform itself. And I would actually dare think that it could end up being worse, primarily because of how that application is structured.
This research follows similar ones on the role of Twitter and Facebook in spreading disinformation in the country during previous political cycles.
When I look at the social media and big tech platforms in general, what we see being a really big problem is something that we call context breakdown, which is that a lot of these companies, simply because they are, except TikTok, which is based in China, they're all, West Coast American companies with this huge global footprint. And they have absolutely no way of being able to catch up to the context of all of these countries that they are in.
TikTok has since removed the videos. The communications team, in a response to SABC, said it is committed to safeguarding its integrity during Kenya's elections. Social media is now a fertile ground to spread hate, consolidate power, and neutralize public outcry, according to research. The two digital media strategists we interviewed agreed.
There is a very serious increase on fake news, not even misinformation, on fake news.
I get a lot of inboxes, a lot of abuses, people telling you, we'll beat you up.
And while Kenya says it is clamping on hate and cyberbullying online,
those who would like to exercise their freedoms in expression, in association, in supporting their preferred candidates and individuals will do so while taking into consideration the welfare of the whole of society. No amount of insults, as I've said before, no amount of criticism of us in the executive branch of government will tempt us enough to resort to retrogressive acts of interfering with freedoms like shutting the internet or, clawing back on freedoms we have acquired through the Constitution and through the law.
Madung believes the ball still lies in the court of the big tech companies to publicly commit to fighting misinformation, disinformation and hate on their platforms in Kenya and indeed across Africa. Sarah Kimani, SABC News, Kenya.
Fake content or images that have been allegedly manipulated have angered Kenya's government. This is ahead of presidential elections that are coming up on the 9th of August. That's on Tuesday. The government says if not controlled, it might even be forced to block Facebook in the country as they worry that such false information might lead to violence around elections and results. Joining me to talk about the role of social media in Kenya's elections is Mark Kaigwa, who is the founder and director of Nendo, a digital storytelling consultancy in Kenya. Mark, a good morning to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Happy to be here, Naledi, and thank you for having me.
Well, can you give us a few examples of what you've really seen as what government is finding so concerning, particularly around fake content online?
Well, I think there's multiple angles to this. I think that there is the government side, there is the social media or social networking side, and then there's the people themselves. And I think, in my view, there is a number of researchers who are studying what people are posting and what is being amplified or spread thanks to these platforms. And those two together, while myself in my personal capacity, I might be interested in engaging one of these platforms, it's really governments or institutions that can have that direct interaction. So what we've seen here in Kenya so far has been that there's been investigative pieces by a couple of the people that you just had in your piece that led up to this interview, and those are now being used as a basis for the government to either react or for civil society and other institutions to try to hold big tech organizations accountable.
Yeah, and if you look at the investment, I think that's quite interesting from political leaders themselves, really wanting to get their message out on social media. I mean, this is certainly different to what we've seen in previous elections. It's been a trend, I think, in other parts of the world, but one that's picking up on the continent now.
Yes, I mean, I have a bit of a conflicted view on this, Naledi. I think that there is a value to social media. I think it's a place of great influence and a place to really, it's a battleground, I would say. But at the same time, given that we're going to be electing about 1,800 plus elected representatives, and there's over 13,000 people vying in this Kenyan election, I would argue that the majority of those who will win a number of these elective seats may have little or not as much of a social media presence. It does concentrate a lot around the capital city. And to give you an example, half of all Facebook users in Kenya, 15 million strong, are in the capital and the greater capital area. So just showing that there is almost an over-indexing for the capital, meaning it's not as national as big, but it's certainly a key battleground.
Yeah, I mean, that's really the case in many places, right? Where you've got the big cities, that's where it seems people are plugged in and all over the social media, and it's not a big reflection of what's going on across a particular country. But have you seen that politicians, they themselves are using social media in instances perhaps where we've got fake content that is actually seemingly pushed out by the political leaders themselves?
Absolutely. I think that, and to your previous point, it's by battleground. I think people over-index for it, meaning people want to be seen a certain way, and you take certain social networks, I'd say Twitter struggles with this more than others. You have the trending topics, and I would say that there's a form of almost information disorder that is very particular to Twitter. You have a number of people all hawking, selling various like items, or what you might call trend jacking, hijacking the trends. And then you have other people who you might describe as thumbs for hire. They're really there just every day, just publishing as much as they can. So it's a battleground where you have basically the actual public sometimes struggling to figure out what's real and what's not. Are these real people with this point of view? And then on this end, even when you are looking for something legitimate, like one of the Premier League clubs that might have played last night, you'll see so many things that don't have to do with that football story or that scoreline you're looking for, and that's the challenge. Now you come to the political class. Now I think for them, if you ask the fact checkers around town, these are the Africa Check, PESA Check, iVerify, the Editors Guild, and the AFP and others, they struggle with this line, because you might find, just like you've alluded to, a political figure actually putting out a false story or really testing the water. And when you follow the chain, you find that they had something to do with it. So there are some lines with which you wonder where you draw the line between fact-checking a claim and fact-checking a person. And it's a tough job. We certainly, all we do is try to raise media literacy with this project we have at Nendo called StopReflectVerify.com. But the fact checkers are the ones who have to really walk this fine line between figuring out who's actually responsible for it and what you equip the public with on how to spot this going forward.
Is this something that you think can be legislated against? I mean, there was a point in South Africa where we were having discussions around possibly facing prosecution if you're found to be publishing fake content. And this was really at the height of COVID-19, when there were so many horrific stories going around about 5G and this, that, and the other. Is it something that can be legislated against in Kenya?
I think one of the challenges with legislation, lady, is that it's also a matter of who's in charge on the day. So we might pass what is very well-meaning and reasonable legislation today, and a change in sort of political dynamics later means it's weaponized, or it's used against people who don't particularly support an existing line. So the biggest challenge here is the ideal is self-regulation and what I'd call a code of practice agreed by all the social media platforms, but stopping shy of actually legislating. Now, there are some positive aspects to regulation, especially with the protection of people's privacy. I think South Africa is leading in this regard with Poppy, and we've later seen other instances from the EU, GDPR, but I would stop a bit shy of that because of the heavy hand that can follow that if the electoral or the political headwinds change.
I mean, does it? What hand is heavier than government threatening to block Facebook in the run-up to the elections? Do you think that's something that you could actually see happening?
I mean, it's hard to tell and hard to speculate, but you have to, take a claim like that seriously. The counterclaim or the counter-response from Kenya, and certainly from at least two cabinet secretaries, has been that is not the official government position. So that's the sort of the fine line to walk. Now, people do talk about freedom and responsibility. I think that Kenya has this brand as Silicon Savannah. It has this basically positioning that it's given the whole world. And I think an internet shutdown would not just have an effect on the optics and the brand and the reputation that Kenya has as a tech hub, but it would also go even further. We've seen that, I think in 2019 here, there's over $1.8 billion lost for 864 hours of an internet shutdown. So for every minute that there's any kind of shutdown, be that of a social network or of the internet itself, you actually have a shilling and cent value that the country is losing, let alone the optics.
Yeah, you're right. Silicon Savannah simply cannot afford to shut down Facebook. But the threats certainly are there. One of the things that we see, though, when you've got political winds blowing in any part of the world, and then you've got the fake content that follows, is you wonder if the consumer of media is able to tell the difference between what's real and what isn't. What have you found?
So at this project I mentioned earlier called StopReflectVerify.com, we have a quiz. And the reason for this quiz is because we've looked through hundreds of thousands of social media updates and found Kenyans, and particularly around COVID in 2020 and the election this time around, get tripped up on some particular areas. So we've, the hardest work here is that when the misinformation travels, it goes so far, so wide, reaches so many people. And when the fact check comes out, it never goes back to the same people, much less gets anywhere near the same reach. And so for us, we're trying to fill in that gap by having a solution that says, hey, in basically a minute and a half, can I test your knowledge, give you a rating, and have you go out and basically, speak to your aunties in those WhatsApp groups, talk to your uncles in those Facebook groups or spots you're in, and relatives, cousins, colleagues, and others. And I think what we found is that generally everything from fake quote cards. So I think one of the people in the interview just said, this is a very visual election. So you have images that are being photo manipulated, quotes for people that were never said or presented out of context. And so the visual medium, even on a place like Facebook or TikTok as well, you're just seeing that being the one where people are basically misleading or even going as far as to disinform actively with people. So that's something where at least we've tried to come up with a solution to help people become a bit smarter and sharper at spotting this themselves.
Yeah, and then you'd hope that mainstream media would be that buffer that people can go to for the facts, right? Is that happening? I mean, is mainstream media doing their job to clarify what's real and what isn't?
I think they are. I mean, I think there's some, there are questions of sort of whenever you trace it back, which particular political leaning or side owns which media group, particularly the private media. So you can't escape that. But what I would say is that they are basically doing their job. I think radio continues to be the farthest reaching media on its own. And then you have television following, and it's really gained in the last couple of years. So the internet, by comparison, is still some 10, 11 million shy than either radio or TV by extension. But I think they continue to be a very important constituency with basically the build-up to how you carry out the election itself, to the tallying and the results and calling of races. So we're really hoping that even the IEBC, the electoral body here, who have a media center there at their headquarters for the election at Bomas of Kenya, we're hoping that there's collaboration and transparency around not just the actual calling of races, but the transmission of results. But yeah, there's a lot of things up in the air, and we're just hoping for the very best and for the media to carry out their duty.
Yeah, I mean, it's the day after tomorrow, those elections will be taking place. Some of your biggest concerns around how the conversation really could go, and what you can offer then as what we do when the conversation goes left and there is that threat of violence in Kenya?
Yeah, I mean, I think this time around, in terms of some of the ethnic rhetoric, certainly from what Nendo has seen in our social media listening work, looking at essentially millions of online updates on social media, we see a very different tone and conversation because of the two principles, at least at the presidential level. And so the data that we're seeing is that the rhetoric, while it is there, is certainly not as polarized or as harsh as 2013 or 2017. And so what that means, in my view, is that one of the bigger challenges is actually apathy, right? I think there's also some challenges in terms of the registration of voters. There was a struggle there with actually meeting some of the targets that were there. So that presents a bit of an X factor. I think people are taking that day off to go carry out their civic duty for those that will actually visit the polls. Some will take place in the city, some will travel up country, as we're seeing this weekend. So really, I think the hope here is that social media and the social media organizations that are there do the best job they can to allow for, basically mitigating the spread of misinformation, and that media carries out their job to be the trusted source while citizens do their duty to tell of their experiences. So a lot of moving parts, but we're really hoping for the best.
Well, we'll be watching closely from South Africa, Mark. Thank you so much for your time, and have yourself a really good Sunday.
Thank you very much, Naledi.
There we go. That's Mark Kaigwa, who's the founder and director of Nendo, digital storytelling consultancy in Kenya, talking to us about how social media is shaping the discussion in the run-up to the elections in Kenya. That's where we wrap things up. Thank you so much for watching our show, Media and Society. We hope you join us again next week, same time, same place. From myself, Naledi Mulo, and the rest of the team, have yourselves a blessed Sunday.